Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's NJ Gloiper, and we're back. I'm I don't think I'm able to use my microphone, the one that's plugged in. Let me see here. Yeah, I don't see the settings for that. It's not letting me use this for my microphone. I do have a microphone plugged in, but I think it's using my phone. So we'll just roll with it. Technical difficulties, of course. You can only test these things live. But anyways, we're back. We're reading Sources of Power by Gary Klein, and we're on chapter 7. What's up, Stimulant? I see you down there. It's 1:30 in the morning here, so this is like the only time I'm free. And it's the only time I'm free that it's not midnight over on the US side of things. So while you guys are awake and before I go to sleep, let's see how much we can read from chapter 7. I got my new Kindle, so instead of reading from the book, we're going to be reading from the Kindle. I got the Kindle Paperwhite, and it's amazing. So I've been reading the book club book of the month, the Secret War, La Guerra Secretera, um, by oh my gosh, can't remember the guy's name. It's like Friedrich Katz. I nailed it. There it is. Um, I've been reading that. That's been good, and I'm really interested in the history, the diplomatic and political history between America and Mexico and the other southern states. There's some good stuff about Argentina and Brazil down there too. So definitely check out that book. Definitely check out Friedrich Katz's The Secret War. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about chapter 7 of Sources of Power. So let's go ahead and jump in. Um, feel free to request if you feel like you want to discuss the book at any point. If I think you'll add to the conversation, I'll bring you up. All right, no more procrastination. Let's go. Let's get into it. Mental simulation and decision making. Mental simulation serves several functions in non-routine decision making. It helps us to explain the cues and information we have received so that we can figure out how to interpret a situation and diagnose a problem. It helps us to generate expectancies by providing a preview of events as they might unfold and by letting us run through a course of action in our minds so we can prepare for it. The Thinking Fast and Slow book, the one I read before this, it was a lot about thinking and ways that we can define like patterns of thought and biases that we have. So this one is purely about the mental models and the decision making processes. So let's see if there's any kind of overlap between the two. I'll be keeping that in mind. And it lets us evaluate a course of action by searching for pitfalls so we can decide whether to adopt it, change it, or look further. Mental simulation shows up in at least 3 places in the RPD model: diagnosing to form situation awareness, generating expectancies to help verify situation awareness, and evaluating a course of action. So let me just go over that. Diagnosing to form situation awareness. That looks like you're trying to map the model onto something you've seen before. You're diagnosing it. You're seeing what it looks like compared to previous experiences. Generating expectancies to help verify situation awareness. That's like if your pattern matches what you'd expect to see based on that input. So generating expected outcomes, and then evaluating a course of action. That's the third part. That's like what's your plan based on the inputs and outputs. So situation awareness. The basic aspect of recognitional decision making is that people with experience can size up the situation and judge it as familiar or typical. Usually, this assessment happens so quickly and automatically that we are not aware of it. Sometimes, though, we have to try to make sense of the different clues. Mental simulation is, okay, here we go. One way to make sense of events and form an explanation. When we use mental simulation to derive a plausible explanation, we feel that we have diagnosed the situation the way a physician might diagnose a disease or an auto mechanic might diagnose an engine problem. So there's certain cues, there's certain aspects of the situation that are familiar to us. It like registers that we've seen this before, we have some kind of experience with it. We've seen this before, it's familiar. That's the whole idea. The diagnosis is a mental simulation that weaves together different events into a story that shows us how the causes led to the effects. So how did we get here? In example 6.1, Captain Rogers decided that the F-4s getting closer to his ship were probably not going to attack him. He was making a decision diagnosis. Sorry, there's a typo here in the PDF. He was making a decision diagnosis of their intent. He was explaining their actions by using his understanding of their intent, and his explanation shaped his own actions in response. In example 6.2, when Captain Rogers decided that the pilot of the approaching aircraft, track number 41314474, probably intended to attack him, he was also making a decision. Rogers was diagnosing the intent of the pilot. So diagnosing in this term, or at least in this situation, was kind of like deducing based on previous experience. He doesn't know the actual intent of the pilot. He has to guess. And this is based on previous experience. This is like you've observed so many situations that based on the cue of the plane, its heading, its altitude, its bearing, how fast it's going, which direction it's headed, where it's coming from, its signals that it's putting out. I think there was like the identify friend or foe signal that it gives out. All of those things are cues. And based on previous experience, you can identify or at least try to deduce the pilot's intent without ever talking to the pilot, without conversing with them, without talking to anybody. It's like you don't have any sources. You literally have to guess, but it's an educated guess. You're diagnosing it. Just like a doctor who's never met you doesn't know if you have cancer or if you have strep throat or anything like that. But he's seen many, many, many patients, and he knows the cues. So with those two things combined, he can pretty clearly and pretty reliably diagnose you with either one of those things. So he's never met you, he's never talked to you until now, and he's going to try and use that information to diagnose your illness and your ailment. So Rogers was diagnosing the intent of the pilot, but this time he was working with faulty data. Situation awareness can be formed rapidly through intuitive matching of features or deliberately through mental simulation. And that's what this chapter is about. Don't forget it. Sometimes a situation reminds us of a previous event, and we try to use this analogy to make sense of what is happening. At times, there are several competing explanations, and we may have to compare them to each other. Usually, we will scan each explanation to see if there are elements that do not seem plausible, so we can reject the less likely ones and keep the best of them. There's some action going on the street below me. Nancy Pennington and Reed Hastie in 1993 have studied the way people make sense of the facts when asked to make a jury decision about whether a defendant is guilty or innocent. During a trial, the attorneys for the prosecution and the defense may present a great deal of evidence. According to Pennington and Hastie, people making jury decisions would have trouble cataloging each piece of information and its implications. So basically, these guys are building a case, and they're trying to explain it to the jury, and the jury is trying to piece it together themselves. And he's saying that there's actually like problems with that. And you would definitely say like, yeah, there's probably a lot of people out there who have trouble like forming a coherent narrative out of just like data. That's something that LLMs, like large language models, are good at. People, not so much. People need narratives or stories fed to them. That's what the media does. So trying to get people to draw implications from data, especially situational data that they didn't experience themselves, that's very difficult. So instead, they build stories or mental simulations, trying to fit the evidence into a plausible account of what happened leading up to the crime. The criteria for evaluating mental simulations described in Chapter 5 come into play: consistency, plausibility, and so on. Instead of passively listening to the attorneys, the jurors are actively trying to build their own stories, their own explanations. Then they compare their stories to those presented by the two attorneys and select the one that more closely matches their own story. Pennington and Hasty call this a story model because the reasoning strategy is to build and evaluate different stories about why people acted in the ways they did. This story model describes how we make diagnostic decisions. Once we have diagnosed the situation, we provide for the aspects of situation awareness shown in Figure 7.1. And I was a little lazy. I didn't get the figures ready this time, but they're really convoluted. I'm telling you, the figures in this book are way more complicated than anything in the last book. The people in the audience with autism would really enjoy these. They're like, it's like flow charts in flow charts. Maybe I'll post it after the space, but it's not really important. So we have a basis for expecting certain things to occur, but not others. We pay attention to cues relevant to this diagnosis. We have some understanding of what goals are reasonable to achieve. We know what types of actions are likely to succeed. Elstein, Schulman, and Sprafka, and that's Sprafka spelled S-P-R-A-F-K-A, in 1978 studied the way physicians make diagnoses. Physicians are trained to suppress any explanations until they have studied all the symptoms to make sure they don't overlook something. That's called induction. You need to have as much evidence as possible before making a hypothesis. That's the scientific method. Collect all your data, then make a hypothesis, then draw a conclusion. However, Elstein and his colleagues found that physicians are forming hypotheses and explanations from the very beginning and using these to direct their examinations. The ideal we sometimes have of a machine-like diagnostician, carefully tagging new data and withholding judgment, does not fit the reality of what people actually do. Asking decision makers to stifle their imaginations while recording data might well reduce efficiency, since stories give meaning to data. And without putting the data into stories, decision makers might find it harder to keep track of everything or to follow up hunches based on the stories that are forming. That's how we think. We think in stories. We think in models. We think in, I guess, cause and effect type scenarios. We don't really like thinking about data. We have to draw conclusions from it. That's just how we think. Expectancies. In diagnosing a situation, people construct mental simulations of how the events have been evolving and will continue to evolve. The more experienced the decision makers are, the more clear-cut are the expectancies. By checking whether the expectancies are satisfied, the decision maker can judge the adequacy of the mental simulation. The greater the violations and the more effort it takes to explain away conflicting evidence, the less confident the decision maker feels about the mental simulation and diagnosis. Someone who has sized up a situation will be aware of some typical ways of reacting to it. In variation 1 of the RPD model, the person just chooses the first action thought of, without deliberating about the little details. However, that simple model does not describe the major decisions. Few of us are so impulsive that we always act out the first thing that pops into our heads. They say, well, he says few of us, but I know a lot of people that do that. I know a lot of people that just do the first thing that comes to their head. They say the first thing on their mind. They're always doing the first thing that comes to their head without really thinking about it, without making any further judgment about whether that's a good idea or not. So if that's you, if I'm subtweeting you, if I'm if I'm throwing shade on you right now, you gotta think a few steps ahead, man. You gotta just think about it. The car rescue example that's redundant. The car rescue example 5.1 showed how to use mental simulation. Let's go to the next page. To evaluate a new course of action, which is variation 3 of the RPD model. The overpass rescue example 3.2 showed how a commander can evaluate several courses of action, one at a time, without ever comparing one to another. These are all cases of a singular evaluation, looking at one action at a time to see if it will work or can be made to work. Our research with the fireground commanders showed that when they did need to evaluate a course of action, they used the strategy of mental simulation. Adrian de Groot, and this is Adriaandegroot, in 1946, found the same result in his study of chess grandmasters. We can think of grandmasters as rational and analytical. When de Groot asked them to think aloud while finding the best move in a chess problem, they relied on mental simulation to evaluate promising courses of action. In de Groot's published records, only 5 cases out of 40 games, each containing several moves to consider, show the grandmasters comparing the strengths and weaknesses of one option to another. The rest of the time, they were rejecting moves or figuring out their consequences. So what he means by that is these chess grandmasters weren't saying, I have 4 options. Let me weigh option 1 against 4, and option 1 against 3, and option 1 against 2, and then 2 against 4, and then 2 against 3. He wasn't doing that. He was just coming up with 4 choices and saying, I'll just go with one of them. So was choice 1 better than 2? Was choice 2 better than 3? That's like the single evaluation. And he's just coming up with choices and figuring out which one's the best in order, which seems to work. They're grandmasters. They're pretty good at the game. But maybe that only works for experts. So keep that in mind. Certainly, there are times to use a comparative rather than a singular evaluation of options. Arasanu and Fisher, and that's Orasanu and Fisher, 1997 presented one clear example. Commercial airline pilots forced to divert their course because of weather or malfunction, trying to determine which airport to select. This is not a decision made using an RPD strategy, although mental simulation can play a role. The RPD model describes how people can make decisions without comparing options. But the RPD model does not describe the only strategy people use in naturalistic settings. Even with time pressure, there will be times when you may need to compare different options. If you've moved to a new city and a realtor has shown you several different houses for sale, you will try to pick the best one by comparing options. Some decision researchers have investigated the ways people actually do contrast options when a task requires a comparison. The following example shows a successful use of the rational choice method. Example 7.1, the Denver Bullets. This is the best parts of the book. These are the best parts of the book. I've been saying that since the beginning. The examples are great. This is, if you're going to tune into anything, these are the best part. These are the best parts. So 7.1, the first example of this chapter, the Denver Bullets. The chief of the Denver Police Department recommends changing the handgun bullet police officers use. In particular, switching to a hollow point bullet that will be more effective in stopping criminals. Some citizen groups become upset by the choice because they think that a hollow point bullet will also increase the severity of injury to an unacceptable level. They protest the choice. A political standoff follows, and the city turns for help to Ken Hammond, Kenhammond, a leading judgment and decision researcher at the University of Colorado. Hammond and his research staff accept the challenge and use formal analysis methods to resolve the dispute. They begin by identifying the mayor's and the city council members' social value trade-offs regarding the relative importance of stopping effectiveness, severity of injury, and threat to innocent bystanders for selecting police handgun ammunition. Next, they convene a panel composed of one firearms expert, one ballistics expert, and 3 wound ballistics experts to make scientific judgments regarding the stopping effectiveness, severity of injury, and threat to innocent bystanders of 80 different ballistics tested at the National Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C. That's quite the panel. The experts' judgments are based solely on the technical characteristics of the bullets, particularly the bullet's performance in ballistic gelatin, a substance that simulates human tissue. The experts do not know the value judgments of the political representatives. So it's like a blind examination. They're just telling you the stats. So these experts come in and they just tell you what the bullet does. In this medium, fired from this handgun. And if it's effective, if it has too much stopping power, not enough, if it'll go through the target, probably. I don't think hollow points do that. I'm pretty sure they are meant to be stopped by the target. So finally, Hammond and his staff analytically combine the social value judgments and the scientific judgments by using a model that equally weights the importance of stopping effectiveness, severity of injury, and threat to innocent bystanders. I know that's redundant. I feel like I've said those 3 words like 8 times. The model identifies a third bullet to consider. Compared to the bullet that the Denver Police Department is using at the time, this one increases stopping effectiveness without increasing the severity of injury. So this one stops the target without injuring the target more than it has to, I guess. Compared to the hollow point bullet recommended by the Denver Police Department, the bullet has the same level of increased stopping effectiveness without increasing the severity of injury. Compared to both the current and the recommended bullets, the bullet identified by the analysis poses less threat to innocent bystanders. The mayor, Denver City Council, Denver Police Department, and city groups accept the bullet identified by the analysis. Although it too is a hollow point bullet, its other technical characteristics, including its lighter weight as compared to the bullet recommended by the Denver Police Department, result in levels of stopping effectiveness, severity of injury, and threat to innocent bystanders that are more acceptable to the community. The dispute is resolved. So, usually you have to bring in the experts to get, an expert decision, to get something that's going to be reliable and something that's going to be reproducible, something that's going to be consistent across different police districts. You have to imagine there's like different levels of training. There's experts who are firing these firearms. There's newbies who probably are like just fresh out of training, like they've never actually encountered any kind of target that they have to fire on outside of the training experience. So this has to work across all environments. This has to work in crowded cities. This has to work in suburbs. So they bring in the experts. They get the data on the bullet, and they take all the other variables out of it. That's really what they're doing. They're being impartial here, and the community is, I guess they accept that. They're just like, okay, these guys are the experts. So trust the experts. These guys know what they're talking about. The dispute is resolved. The rational choice model is termed a compensatory strategy, since a weakness on one evaluation dimension can be offset by strengths on other dimensions. Researchers have also identified a number of non-compensatory strategies that are simpler to use. Studies have shown that decision makers in natural settings use these simpler non-compensatory strategies. Instead of trying to see if the strengths on one dimension compensate for the weaknesses on others, we may use methods such as selecting the option that is the best on the dimension that is most important and ignoring the other dimensions. Another simple strategy is called elimination by aspects, and this study was done by Tversky in 1972, Tversky, in which all the options are evaluated on the most important dimension. The ones that fail to meet a standard are dropped, and the surviving options are evaluated on the next most important evaluation dimension. and the ones that do not meet the standard are dropped, filtering and filtering until only one is left. Yet another strategy is a face-off procedure in which one option is compared to a second, and the winner gets compared to a third, and then the winner of that face-off is compared to a fourth, and so on. Here, the comparison considers only two options at a time. Example 7.1 described a successful use of formal analysis methods. There are times to use comparative strategies and times to use singular evaluation strategies, such as the one described by the RPD model. And what he means by that is you have different constraints based on the situation. Sometimes you have time to evaluate everything and every choice against one another, and other times you don't. Other times you are just so pressed for time, you have to make a decision now. It's more important that you make a decision than choosing the correct one. Table 7.1 shows some predictions. I'm not going to get into that. It's a crazy table. So anyways, this breaks down the table. This explains it. People seem more likely to use singular strategies in the following situations. When time pressure is greater, evaluating one option at a time until an acceptable one is found. The reason is that it takes too much time to lay out the alternatives and analyze the evaluation criteria. Here's another one, and I was talking about this earlier. When people are more experienced in the domain. With experience, they can be more confident in their ability to size up the situation and recognize plausible courses of action as the first ones they consider. So experts make better first judgments. Their gut instinct, the first choice that comes to mind, they're able to evaluate it against another one and just quickly make a judgment. And that seems to be what's comfortable or what they relax into. So I've heard Wendell and Bookhat talk about this. When you're under pressure, when you're in the field, let's say, when you're out there on the streets and you're in real life, like it's IRL, man. When you're pressed, when you have a situation at hand, when you got to act, you do not rise to the occasion. You do not somehow act or choose better decisions better than you did in training. You revert to your training. The best day in your training is probably the best you'll act out in that situation. So you fall back to your training. You do not rise to the occasion. That's why training is so important. That's why experience is so important. Experience is training if you want to think about it a different way. So you do not perform better than any of your days in training. Your best day in training, that's the best you'll perform in the field. So, and that's what they're saying. They're saying with experience, you can make better decisions, but you will not make better decisions than someone with more experience than you by a gut reaction. I don't think like that's unlikely. So experience does matter. When the conditions are more dynamic, the time and effort needed to set up an analysis can be rendered useless when the context shifts. When they were talking about the firefighters in previous chapters, the fire situation changes rapidly. One part of the house is on fire. You finally set up your hose and you start hosing it down to put out the fire, and the fire's already spread. You got to get more trucks in. You got to figure out new angles of attack. Maybe it's not even a fire you can put out with water anymore. Maybe you need a helicopter to drop something on it. So coming up with a plan isn't always the best plan. Sometimes it's better to just act because the situation's changing so rapidly. Also, when the goals are ill-defined, ambiguity makes it hard to come up with evaluation criteria that apply across all options. Yeah, if you don't have a clear goal, coming up with a very precise plan might just lead you down to a decision that doesn't get you towards the goal because it wasn't clearly defined. So in contrast, people seem more likely to use comparative evaluation in these situations. So that was singular evaluation. Now they're using comparative evaluation in these situations. When they have to justify their choice, higher authorities usually look for evidence that alternatives were considered. When conflict resolution is a factor. In the case of the Denver Bullets, Different stakeholders held different priorities, and a common analytical metric was needed to place all the considerations into a common format. When the decision maker is trying to optimize, finding the best course of action, this is what the comparison is all about. The singular evaluation that uses mental simulation tries to find the first workable option, not necessarily the best. And when the situation is computationally complex, this is not something anyone can easily recognize, such as analyzing an investment portfolio to select the best strategy. We have computers for that. Obviously, we would prefer to use those. But they can compare many elements against all the other elements easily. That's something that computers do. They're computers. They compute. But even when decision makers are comparing options and trying to find the best one, they may not be using rational choice strategies, such as assessing each option on a common set of criteria. The process may be more like running a mental simulation of each course of action and comparing the emotional reactions, the discomfort or worry or enthusiasm that each option produces when it is imagined. So those gut instincts, those are feelings, those are like they're like low resolution. It's not something that you can articulate. Sometimes people just say, I have a bad feeling, or I don't feel comfortable doing that. Maybe they can't articulate what they mean, but if they're an expert, you would trust their judgment that maybe their bad feeling has something of import. Maybe that's important. De Groot's study of chess players shows this. The chess grandmasters were trying to find the best move in a position, yet they were not comparing the options on a common set of criteria, center control, defensive security. They were using progressive deepening to imagine how the option would be developed and forming a judgment and emotional reaction to these potential outcomes. The table of outcomes and reactions suggests that we will be more likely to compare options when faced with unfamiliar situations. The reason is that a lack of experience will prevent us from generating reasonable options, or will at least reduce our confidence in the options we do generate. If time pressure is low, the conditions are fairly stable, and the goals are clear, then we should expect to find the highest level of option comparisons. Testing the RPD model in different domains. I based the boundary conditions shown in Table 7.1 on a set of studies that looked at decision-making in different domains. The goal of this research program was to find out if the RPD model held for other decision-making strategies. Come on, go to the next page. Decision-making strategies besides those used by firefighters. We also kept searching for situations where the RPD model breaks down to test its limits. After we conducted the first study with the fireground commanders, my colleagues and I compiled all the decision points and totaled up the number of times the commander had used a recognitional decision strategy with singular evaluation rather than comparative evaluation. The percentage was 80%. So this guy's an expert, and he's in rapidly changing situations. The goals are clear. We need to put out the fire, but not per situation. Each situation is different. It's a different building. It's a different structure each time. So, or it's outdoors. It might be like might be a forest fire. Could be an oil fire. We saw that in one of the examples. There was like an oil derrick that was like leaking fiery like oil. So that was pretty crazy. So the percentage was 80% for singular evaluation recognitional decision strategies by the fireground commander out of 156 decision points. This is entered into the top line of Table 7.2 to compare it to other naturalistic decision-making strategies we performed, blah, 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 blah. Most of these studies were funded by the Army Research Institute, or ARI. Next, Roberta Calderwood, Marvin Thordson, and Beth Crandall. And I'm pretty sure Beth Crandall is referenced in Thinking Fast and Slow. That name sounds familiar. Those three and I contrasted Okay, this is a weird typo. Again, it's an Israeli author. I'm like trying to read through this. Okay, here we go. And I contrasted experienced versus very new commanders, expecting that the percentage of recognitional decisions would be low for the new commanders. We tabulated only the toughest decision points in the non-routine incidents to make things a little more difficult on the RPD model. By using the tighter selection on decision points, the percentage of RPD observations dropped below 60%, and it was lower for the novices than for the expert commanders. So that backs up what he was saying earlier, that experts use recognitional decision models and singular evaluation models more because they have the experience to draw from. In the next study, we sought more novice decision makers. We assessed tank platoon leaders who were going through their first instruction course at Fort Knox. Some had never ridden in a tank before. Here, the percentage of recognitional decisions fell below 50%. This was the project where Chris Brezovic had tear gassed himself. It had been a tough study. Part of the time, we were riding with the tank platoon leaders in the leader's position of the M1 tanks, so we can conduct the interview immediately after each exercise and before the tank platoon leader could hear the after-action review of the instructors. We wondered if recognitional decision-making was more common in individuals or in leaders working with small teams. Therefore, we next studied incident commanders who worked for the Forest Service and were in charge of managing large forest fires. By good fortune, we were able to obtain first-hand observations of incident commanders and their teams in action against a very large fire. The entire organization was composed of 4,000 people. Units from all over the country were flown in on short notice and had to be organized and managed. In a setting such as this, we speculated that people would see things differently, would argue with each other more, and would force a strategy by which different options were identified and compared. We were only partially right. When the incident commanders were making operational decisions about the firefighting itself, the percentage of RPD strategies was about the same as the fireground commanders. But when they were working on organizational decisions, such as how to discipline someone for doing a poor job, the percentage of recognitional decisions went down. One possible reason is that the incident commanders were less expert with these kinds of decisions. When you hear the word expert, you should be thinking experience, by the way. The next possibility we considered was that the RPD model held only during time pressure decisions. To test this hypothesis, Chris Brezovic and I studied the way design engineers made decisions about interfaces. This project was conducted for the U.S. Air Force's Armstrong Laboratory. These decisions could stretch out over days or even months, rather than seconds and minutes. Even here, the majority of tough decisions were coded as RPD strategies. So even over long time frames, they're still making those recognitional decision models or decision strategies. So what that means is like they're just seeing cues and reacting to them based on the first workable strategy. Let's see. Even here, blah, blah, blah. Furthermore, in many cases that we coded as comparative evaluations, the design engineers had started to compare options, filtered out some alternatives, and then switched to a different strategy, such as physically simulating the option and trying it out. Perhaps we were getting distorted data because of our interview method. So Marvin Thordson and Chris Brezovic traveled to Fort Hood, Texas, to watch command and control teams at the Army Brigade level to go through a training exercise. The decisions were going to be made by teams, not individuals, and we thought this might further reduce the rate of RPD strategies. Marvin and Chris stationed themselves in the small trailers where the battle command teams were located. We got a complete record of one 5-hour planning session. Going through the tapes, Marvin identified and coded 27 distinct decision points. Only one of those points showed evidence of comparing options, particularly surprising since Army planners are indoctrinated to generate a set of several different options usually 3. So even though their training requires that they come up with a bunch of different options and weigh them against each other, they're still like in the field. They're still just coming up with a few options and picking the first workable one. They're not comparing them against each other. Out of 27. That's pretty crazy. George Kaempf, and that's spelled Kaempf. Marvin Thordson, Steve Wolf, and I interviewed U.S. Navy commanders and captains, seeking to find out how they made difficult decisions involving low-intensity conflicts in 1996. The Navy officers had served on Aegis cruisers. This research project had a specific purpose. The Office of Naval Research wanted to learn how to build better human-computer interfaces to reduce accidents such as the Vincennes shootdown. If there was ever a setting that called for recognitional decision-making, it was this one. The time pressure was severe. The skill level was moderately high. People generally had a year or more in their positions, and many years of related experience working up to their positions. The situations changed rapidly. Moreover, there were very few courses of action available to the officers, and there were clear guidelines, including official rules of engagement, telling them how they must react. Table 7.2 shows that 95% of the decision points were coded as recognitional. So that's 19 out of 20. In these cases, the decision maker reported he had not compared any options and that his course of action was not a novel one. To date, we have formally coded more than 600 decision points for the non-routine and challenging decisions that people have faced in natural settings. In a large percentage of cases, ranging from 46 to 96%, people have used recognitional strategies. Only in a small number of instances have we found evidence for comparative evaluation of options. We don't like to think. We don't like to compare options. It's not, even if we have time, he's telling you, even if you have time, that's not your first instinct. Your first instinct is to use your experience to bypass all of your thinking. You've seen it all before. You've seen these examples, whether in training or in the field. You know what to expect, and you see a cue, you come up with a few choices, and you just choose the first workable one. We don't like to think. Even this number might be overstated since the comparison was often abandoned before the final choice. For all of these reasons, we believe that the RPD model is a general strategy found in most domains. The data I have described in this chapter make a strong claim that recognitional decision-making is a common strategy and that comparing options is fairly infrequent. Because of the important implications of this claim, other researchers have independently investigated the issue to determine if they could replicate our findings. Mosier, and that's M-O-S-I-E-R, in 1991 studied videotapes of 23 three-person crews consisting of qualified commercial airline crews flying a full mission simulation in a Boeing 727 simulator. She found that most crews did not wait until they had a complete understanding of the situation to make and implement decisions. Rather, they seemed to make a recognitional, almost reflexive judgment based upon a few critical items of information, and then spent additional time and effort verifying its correctness through continued situational investigation. So it's like a select from it. When someone hands you like they're holding out a couple cards and they're like, pick a card, and you pick it, and you have to justify your choice. You have to verify that it was the correct choice. Imagine someone hands you a couple dollar bills. You have no idea if they're counterfeit or not, and you have to pick which one is counterfeit. Usually you're just going to look at them first. You're just going to look at it and pick one. You're going to say, this one doesn't look right. This one just doesn't look like the others. This one doesn't look like a dollar that I've seen. You're going to pick it up. You're going to feel it after you picked it out. You're probably going to pick it out and say, I don't like this one. You're going to feel it. You're going to crumple it. You're going to bend it. You're going to hold it up to the light and see if it has like the holographic strip in it. You're going to see if the ink changes color, if it's got microprint on it. You're going to see if it has like the seal on it and if it lines up correctly in like the right position. All these things. Does it have the fibers in it? You're going to do all these things, but only after selecting it, only after looking at it and saying, I don't like the way this one looks. So it's like this recognitional thing. It's this thing that you do almost subliminally. It's like below your conscious level. You're making decisions and then justifying it. You're rationalizing it. Because you've seen all the other dollar bills in your life. You've seen hundreds of dollar bills. And you've seen different kinds of dollar bills. You've seen them in different qualities, like I guess like conditions, you would say. Like you've seen mint condition $100 bills that just were printed. You've seen dollar bills that were crumpled and left in the mud. You've seen you've seen them probably torn in half. So you've seen what it looks like when you probably have torn one in your lifetime. You've probably done it yourself. You probably know what it feels like to tear a dollar bill. If you don't, go watch Nick's stream where he's tearing up $100 bills in front of I forget who was on the other side of the stream, but someone was watching it. It might have been Worski, I forget who it was, but someone was like shitting their pants that he was tearing up $100 bills and throwing them at the camera. He knows what that feels like. Okay, I don't know if I've ever torn up 100, but Nick has. So maybe that should be a goal for you. Maybe that should be a life goal, to be able to tear up $100 bill and not give a shit. But yeah, so you're going to pick the one out that feels wrong because you've seen all the other dollar bills in your life, and you can weigh it against all the other dollar bills almost instantly, very rapidly. It's low resolution. It's not, you don't have a lot of evidence for why, and you can't articulate why it feels like it's a fake dollar bill, but you can choose it, and you could probably be correct most of the time. So the Boeing airline crews are doing the same thing. They're making recognitional decisions. It's almost reflexive, based on a few critical items of information, and then spending the additional time and effort verifying its correctness through continued situational investigation. That's what we do. That's how we make decisions. That's how experts make decisions. If later information changed situation assessment enough to prompt a change of decision, a second option was generated and implemented. Virtually no time was spent in any comparisons of options. In fact, the bulk of time was spent in situation assessment rather than alternative generation for all crews. Flynn, Slavin, and Stewart, and Flynn is Flin, and then Slavin is Slaven, and Stewart in 1996 studied emergency decision-making in the offshore oil industry. Their study used experienced offshore installation managers of oil platforms. The 6 participants described how they would deal with the hypothetical crisis scenario, adapted from a standard industry training exercise. The data were coded for number of decision points and for type of decision strategy used with each of the 107 decision points. The results show little evidence of generating multiple options when faced with crisis decisions. The mean for the 6 participants was 10%. Whereas 90% of the strategies were classified as being consistent with the RPD model. The majority of their decisions, wrote Flynn, seemed to be based on recognition of a particular problem and the generation of a single course of action drawn from their company's standard operating procedure. Pascual and Henderson, Pascual is Pascual, and Henderson is Henderson, in 1997 collected data from 15 experienced commissioned and non-commissioned officers from the British Army. Using a set of controlled but functionally realistic simulated exercises. All experimental sessions were video and audio recorded, and subjects were requested to verbalize the actions they were taking as the scenario unfolded. When they were sending or receiving information, planning, setting goals, or processing information. So they were just talking through it. They were just talking aloud, their thought process, their decision-making process. Subjects were not asked to explain the reasoning behind any of their actions or judgments. A primary finding from the analysis of the coded responses across all scenarios was the dominance of naturalistic strategy utilization, which was 87%. It dominated their decision-making strategies over classical, which was 2%, hybrid 3%, and other strategies, which were 8%. In assessing the form of the naturalistic strategies found, Pascual and Henderson concluded that recognition primed decision-making, RPD decision-making, Clearly dominated, it is felt that the RPD model provides the most appropriate, accurate, and utilitarian concepts for describing a broad range of C2, or command and control, decision-making behavior, particularly for those subjects with considerable military experience. Randall, Randel, Pugh, Pugh, and Reed in 1996 studied 28 electronic warfare technicians who varied in experience level from 6 months to 7 years. Data were collected using scenarios conducted with a simulator that has high physical and audio fidelity to the equipment found on board ships. They used the critical decision method to identify decision points and study the strategies used. The experts placed a greater emphasis on situation assessment, while the majority of novices emphasized deciding on the course of action. That almost seems backwards. That is counterintuitive. That is why they're experts and you are not. This finding is consistent with the RPD model, which proposed that experts base their decisions on situation assessment. I can't stress that enough. I cannot stress that enough. They base their decisions, the experts base their decisions on situation assessment. That's induction. Induction. The majority of the decisions discussed, 93%, involved serial rather than concurrent deliberations, whether assessing the situation or deciding on a course of action. We found no differences between experts and novices in their use of serial deliberations over concurrent deliberations. All three groups, experts, intermediates, and novices, used predominantly serial deliberations as specified by the RPD model. To summarize, the RPD model was developed on the basis of field studies of the way that experienced personnel actually make decisions. The model explains how people can use experience to react rapidly and make good decisions without having to contrast options. The model has been tested and has been supported by different research teams working in a variety of settings. The RPD model is not synonymous with NDM research. There are other NDM models. See Klein, Orisanu, Calderwood, and Zambach. And Zambach's the only name I haven't spelled before. ZSAMBOK. And that was in 1993. Moreover, the RPD model is incomplete. It does not cover teams, organizations, issues of managing workload and attention. So it's only on situations involving an individual decision maker. The RPD model does not describe the strategies people use when they do have to compare options in natural settings. The significance of the RPD model is that it appears to describe the decision strategy used most frequently by people with experience. It explains how people can use experience to make difficult decisions. Excuse me. My mouth is getting a little dry. Let me get a sip of water here. I got my Vicky Kettle on. This water is so good, man. I was doing some research of the water on the market. I think in the US and in Spain, it has the most dissolved solids in any consumer water product. So it's 3,000 parts per million. So I don't know what percentage that is off the top of my head, but it's like, I think Fiji water has like 500. And there's another popular one that has like 1,200. And that one's like the second most. So this one's like 3,000. It tastes like seawater. I'm not going to lie. When it's cold, it's so good. If it's room temperature, it literally tastes like you're drinking seawater. So it's not for everyone. Anyway, sorry. It demonstrates that people can make the effective decisions without using a rational choice strategy. Prior to the RPD model and others like it, traditional decision researchers speculated that under certain task conditions, people would not use a rational choice strategy, but no one presented a coherent idea of what the alternative might be. Yeah, I think like 3 or 4 chapters ago, someone asked like, if you're not using the scientific method and you're not using, I guess like any other computational strategy, how would you make a decision? And people were like, intuition, gut instinct, and like, and people were like laughing them like off. They were just like laughing them out of the room. They were saying like, no, that's not a real decision strategy. Like, you can't just use intuition. But he's telling you like that's what experts are doing. He's like, this is not a rational decision making strategy. It's like almost irrational, and it's what experts do every day. So assess your situation, come up with a few choices, and pick the first workable model, and keep evaluating while you're acting it out until you need a new strategy. That's like what experts do. They don't sit down there with the whiteboard. If it's like a rapidly changing situation, or he just told you when it doesn't work. So just rewind the tape like 30 seconds so I don't have to explain myself again. But he's just saying like experts, when they're making like an individual decision, this is what they do. Blah, 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 blah. Would not use it. Yeah. But no one presented a coherent idea of what the alternative might be. Most researchers assumed that it would be a defective version of the rational choice strategy or some sort of random process. I wouldn't call instinct or intuition or experience-based decision-making random. I wouldn't call it defective, and I wouldn't call it incoherent. I would just call it instinctive. I would just call it it's like hard to articulate. If you're an expert, how are you going to tell someone how to be an expert? That's like a whole field. There's a whole field for how to like teach someone correctly. How are you going to articulate everything you've learned and condense it and distill it into something that someone can get something out of? How are they going to learn from your culmination of your life's experiences, from your perspective, from your frame of like your like you have a singular point of view of the world colored by all your previous experiences. And that's before you became an expert. So you have like a childhood, you have memories that no one else has. How are you going to color? How are you going to like paint them a picture of how to be an expert without coloring it with your own experiences? That's a difficult task. So of course, yeah, people are going to be like, but yeah, intuition doesn't work. Well, prove it. Like they're asking you to prove it, but it's like, how can you prove the negative? How can you say it's not an effective strategy? So he did the research. He's telling you how experts make decisions and how intuition is actually a strategy. It's a coherent strategy. It's not rational, but it's coherent. And it's not random. The description of the RPD model provides a counterexample to rational choice and makes it easier to take natural decision strategies more seriously. So that's the end of the chapter. We got some applications here. I think there was like 2 pages of applications. So this is going to tell you how you can apply what we just talked about the last, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I don't know how long we've been going, but it's going to tell you how you can apply this to your own life. So this is the practical part. This section describes 2 kinds of implications growing out of the RPD model: recommendations about training and about designing systems. For a detailed discussion of the applications of the NDM framework, Flynn provides an excellent survey of the implications of NDM research for decision support systems design, training, and personnel selection for critical incident managers, such as police officers, firefighters, and offshore oil installation managers. I'm just breezing through this because it's a mouthful and it doesn't really tell you a lot. The standard advice for making better decisions is to identify all the relevant options, define all the important evaluation criteria, weight the importance of each evaluation criterion, evaluate each option on each criterion, tabulate the results, and select the winner. In one form or another, this paradigm finds its way into training programs the world over. Again and again, the message is repeated: careful analysis is good. Incomplete analysis is bad. And again, the message is ignored. It's ignored. Trainees listen dutifully, then go out of the classes and act on the first option they think of. The reasons are clear. First, the rigorous analytical approach cannot be used in most natural settings. Second, the recognitional strategies that take advantage of experience are generally successful, not as a substitute for the analytical methods, but as an improvement on them. He's saying that you can use them together. The analytical methods are not the ideal. They are the fallback for those without enough experience to know what to do. So when Destiny pulls out the rubric of like the Israel debate, and he says, well, actually, we can't talk about this because it says that if we talk about this definition, then we have to talk about it from this perspective, and we have to make sure we include Zionists as a blah blah blah, and like he goes through the rubric of like how to approach the situation analytically, and Nick's like, no, I can tell you from experience what these people do because I've seen it. He's seen how these foreign agents act on our nation. He's like on our nation and in organizations in our nation, and like on an individual level. He's seen it from the particular to the general, and he can tell you from experience how these people act. We don't need Destiny to tell us how we can talk about something or how to analyze it, or which viewpoint we should analyze it from, or which philosophical debate we should have, or how to frame it. We don't need that. We can just tell you what we saw because we've seen it enough. We can distill it, and it's reproducible. It's coherent. It's rational. Well, it might not be rational. It's actually really hard to explain to people. It's almost irrational. But it's coherent, it's reproducible, it's consistent, and it matches people's experiences. And that's probably the most important thing, because if other people have the same experiences and you reveal the cues to them, that's what red pilling is. They might not even be aware that the cues are perceptible to them, or that they've seen them before, or that they could still happen to them in day-to-day life. But if you reveal the cues to them, suddenly it's like when you turn on the waypoint system in Call of Duty, and like suddenly the objective is highlighted, or even better, it's like Cold-Blooded Pro, when you could like see your enemies through the red dot sight or something, like the heat-seeking shit or whatever, infrared. Like you can see people through walls, and it's like you could never see that way before. It's like Neo seeing the code. You can see things that nobody else can see because you can see the cues. You can see the before the cause and the effect. You can see the pre-cause. You can almost like have precognition of like what's happening, and you become like a mind reader. You become like a fortune teller, like a future seer or something, like an oracle. So it's being able to describe the cues to other people, and them being able to see the cues and react effectively. And that gets better with experience and making those decisions based on those cues. And you can use analytical reasoning to sharpen your decision making, but seeing the cues and recognizing them and adapting your strategy based on that, that's what expertise is. And that comes with recognizing your situation, situational assessment. Okay. One application of the RPD model is to be skeptical of courses or books about powerful methods for making effective decisions. 30 days guaranteed or your money back. I doubt whether such methods exist. Means, Salas, Crandall, and Jacobs. And Means is MEANS. Salas is SALAS. Crandall is CRANDALL. And Jacobs is Jacobs. Reviewed the literature on the effectiveness of such analytical decision training and found that the results have been disappointing. Johnson, Driscoll is Driskell, and Salas, we said that one earlier, have collected data showing that subjects did better using unsystematic strategies than analytical strategies for identifying and comparing options. A second application for this chapter is to suggest that analytical... I like how his application is like to not get duped. His application is don't fall for like the effective decision strategy books. That's like that's he's like telling you not to buy his competitors' books. Okay, so the way you can use this strategy is to not buy my competitors' book. That's so funny. All right, well, I respect the grind. A second application of this chapter is to suggest that analytical methods may be helpful for people who lack experience. Decision training courses may be valuable as aids for novices or for complex cases with many different stakeholders. When I have used analytic methods in such settings, they have been helpful for setting out different factors and helping everyone achieve a shared perspective. Plaus, Plous, in 1993, and Russo and Shoemaker. Russo is Russo, and Shoemaker is Shoemaker in 1989, present well-written guides to using analytical methods. A third application is to consider which decisions are worth making. When options are very close together in value, we can call this a zone of indifference. The closer together the advantages and disadvantages of competing options, the harder it will be to make a decision, but the less it will matter. So that's like diminishing returns. For these situations, it is probably a waste of time to try to make the best decision. If we can sense that we're within the zone of indifference, we should make the choice anyway, any way we can, and move on to other matters. That's pretty good. That's good advice. You can sit there and deliberate on which action to choose. You can pull out the spreadsheet and come up with all the different options, weigh them against each other, but eventually you're going to get to the zone of indifference. You're going to meet the law of diminishing returns, and anything you do will give you less and less benefit. It'll give you fewer and fewer advantages. So sometimes it's better to just pick a decision and go with it. A situation that is like the zone of indifference can occur under conditions such as combat. A squad leader may have to decide whether to take an uphill or a downhill route, knowing that one will probably lead to safety and the other to an ambush. But he or she may have no information about which route to take and may be under attack and unable to remain in the current position. Here, the difficulty is created by the lack of information rather than the closeness of two outcomes. We can think of this as a zone of ignorance. The squad leader will have to choose one route, primarily by chance. In many cases, this situation will transform into a problem-solving activity, with the apprehensive squad leader taking precautions such as assigning people with more experience as scouts, making sure that troops are dispersed, and so forth. A fourth application is not to teach someone to use the RPD model. There is no reason to teach someone to follow the RPD model, since the model is descriptive. It shows what experienced decision makers already do. That's what I was trying to say earlier when I was going on my tear. It's all you can do is reveal the cues to people. You can train them, you can give them training, but you're not training them on the model. You're training them on reacting to cues and the strategies to respond to each cue. So you're not teaching them how to think. You're not rearranging their brain or scrambling, their neurons, or like trying to get them to think a different way. People all think the same. He was telling you 87% of people do the RPD model type strategies, the recognitional decision-making strategy. So they don't need to be taught to do that. That's what experienced people do. So you just give them experience. You just put them in the field. You put them in the training simulator until they come out like a freaking machine. Okay, so you're not trying to teach them how to think. You're not trying to rewire their brains. They do that on their own. A fifth application is to improve decision skills. Because the key to effective decision-making is to build up expertise, one temptation is to develop training to teach people to think like experts. But in most settings, this can be too time-consuming and expensive. However, if we cannot teach people to think like experts, perhaps we can teach them to learn like experts. After reviewing the literature, I identified a number of ways that experts in different fields learn. There's a missing period. The ways that different experts in different fields learn. Klein in 1997. This is the last book we read. This is why it's so good. This is why we're reading these things in order. Klein in 1997. They engage in deliberate practice so that each opportunity for practice has a goal and evaluation criteria. They compile an extensive experience bank. They obtain feedback that is accurate, diagnostic, and reasonably timely. They enrich their experiences by reviewing prior experiences to derive new insights and lessons from mistakes. The first strategy is to engage in deliberate practice. In order to do this, people must articulate goals and identify the types of judgment and decision skills they need to improve. So that hurts. Looking at yourself critically like that, seeing where you fall short, seeing your shortcomings, seeing all the places that you need to work on, all the things you need to work on, all the traits and behaviors and all your failures, and saying, like, you're just going under the microscope. You're just putting yourself under there and putting yourself in the spotlight. It doesn't feel good. It sucks. But it's just like going to the gym. It's like anything else. No pain, no gain. You gotta do it. You gotta identify your weak points and annihilate them. You need to find your weak points where you fall short and eradicate them. You need to become better. You need to find experience. You need to find someone who can teach you, who can, I guess, build you up. Because part of it is breaking yourself down. Part of it is like analyzing yourself and like critiquing yourself and almost dissecting yourself. But then you need to go find experience and fill in the gaps. It's not enough to just criticize yourself. You also have to, then go and do the work to become better. So it sucks. That's why nobody likes practice, but that's what you have to do. You have to get out there. The grind set guys are right in that aspect. The meathead Marine guys are correct. You should be getting out there and doing whatever it is you have to do, whether you want to do it or not. It's like the who's the guy? Wake up at 4 a.m., crush my balls, put my hand in the toaster. Don't like it? Good. Like, maybe that's a little extreme. Maybe you're just destroying your body, but this directionally correct. The strategy of compiling an extensive experience bank appears important, but the mere accumulation of experiences may not be sufficient. The experiences need to include feedback that is accurate, diagnostic, and timely. In domains where it is possible to obtain much feedback, weather forecasting, decision-making expertise develops. In domains that are not marked by opportunities for effective feedback, clinical psychology, mere accumulation of experience does not appear to result in growth of decision expertise. In addition to feedback, expertise may be affected. Sorry, I just got a message. Let me see what I got here. Thanks, Stimmy, for posting that. We're almost done here, so it's a little late for that, but I appreciate it. I appreciate the sentiment. We're on I don't know, we probably have 2 minutes left in the chapter. That's what my Kindle says anyways. In addition to feedback, expertise may be affected by the opportunity to reflect on experiences. For example, chess masters do not spend all their time playing games against each other. The bulk of their time is spent in studying positions and games. During a tournament, a grandmaster will be working against the clock and will not be reflecting on the implications of the game. But afterward, there is time to go over the game record to look for opportunities that were missed, early signals that were not noticed, or assessments and assumptions that were incorrect. In this way, an experience, even a single game, can be recycled and reused. That's pretty badass. Honestly, being able to just like look at a game that you've played and just look at it in like an innumerable number of ways across different time scales. Like, think about it. You just lost in chess and you're rewatching the replay and you're like, damn, that sucked. You're like, I should have done something else. But then like 5 years later, you watch yourself play chess and you're like, actually, that was pretty smart, but I fucked up here. Actually, I messed up later. I just didn't catch it because I didn't have enough experience. So the way you look at it, the way you analyze your mistakes will change over time as well. So not only do you get better at the strategy, you get better at analyzing your own mistakes. And that seems to be like a feedback loop. So if you want to be a better strategist, or whatever, I don't know how to, whatever. If you want to get better at making decisions, maybe you just have to make a lot of decisions and then think about those decisions a lot and recycle it and reuse it and go over it over and over until you find out what went wrong. In many field settings where there are limited opportunities for experience, developing the discipline of reviewing the decision-making processes for each incident can be valuable. The strategies provide a concept that is consistent with principles of adult learning, in which the learner is assumed to be motivated and the emphasis is on granting autonomy and ownership to the learner, rather than having the trainers maintain tight control. That's another important point. Self-motivation, that's just discipline. He's telling you the learner is assumed to be motivated. Motivation's fleeting. Sometimes you just gotta, get up and do it. So discipline comes into play here. So far, I have been describing our theoretical framework. How does this get translated into action? We recently had an opportunity to develop and implement a decision skills training program. The goal of the effort was to train approximately 30 U.S. Marine Corps squad leaders to handle a variety of decisions during a field exercise. The period of the training was 3.5 months, but only a few hours each week could be allocated to the training. The squad leaders were enlisted men with high school, but not college, experience in between 4 and 8 years in the Marine Corps. John Schmidt, Mike McCloskey, and I put together a decision skills training approach consisting of several exercises. 3 of those exercises were to identify decision requirements, practice with tactical decision games, and review experiences using a cognitive critique. The decision requirements exercise is for the squad leaders to identify the key judgments and decisions facing them, why they are difficult, and where they can go wrong. These decision requirements are the high drivers, the specific decision skills that they need to polish. In addition, by identifying the decision requirements of their mission, identifying a good landing zone for helicopters, judging the amount of time it will take a squad to move from one position to another, the squad leaders could find ways to practice these judgments, such as getting feedback from helicopter pilots about the adequacy of a landing zone or timing different squads as they moved across terrain to become more sensitive to factors such as the nature of the terrain, the effect of weather, and the amount of equipment carried. Thus, the decision requirements let the squad leaders identify their own needs for their own missions and let them discover ways to engage in deliberate practice and obtain feedback for their judgments and decisions. Tactical decision games are low-fidelity paper and pencil simulations of incidents that might occur in the field. Each game consists of a map showing the setting for the incident and the location of the teams involved, and a brief verbal description of what is transpiring. The verbal description presents a dilemma with high levels of uncertainty. Upon completing the verbal description of the dilemma, the person leading the tactical decision game asks each of the participants to take 3 to 5 minutes to consider how he or she would react. Let me just double check here. I just want to make sure I'm not reading on to the next chapter. Hold on one sec. Kindles are fun to play with, but hard to manage. Oh my God. Okay, hold on. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Holy cow. Dude, just go back. Is my Kindle frozen? This is unplanned. It's not going back. I can't go to the previous page. That's crazy. Go back. Dude, I'm literally having technical difficulties right now. I have the physical book. I can go get it if this doesn't work. But I should be able to go back a page. Why won't it let me go back? All right, let me see if I can just change the location here. That's changing the font size. I do not want to change the font. Dude, it's all fucked up. Let me go get the book. This is ridiculous. Give me 1 second. That's why we have the physical book, because sometimes Kindles wig out. All right, let's see. Where were we? Applications. We just basically finished applications. Let me see here. Yeah. Okay, here we go. We talked about tactical decision games. That's right. They're low-fidelity paper and pencil simulations of incidents that might occur in the field. Each game consists of a map showing the setting for the incident and the location of the teams involved. Cognitive critiques help the squad leaders reflect on what went well and not so well during the exercise, and to use this reflection to increase how much they learned from experience. The critique is a simple exercise consisting of questions about how the squad leader had estimated the situation, what was accurate, uncertainty, where was it a problem and how was it handled, and intent and rationale, what was the focus of the effort, and contingencies, reactions to what if probes. The checklist could be used after tactical decision games as a way for the squad leaders to compare notes, get feedback, and see how others were perceiving the situation. The checklist, primarily designed to be used after field training exercises, was a way to enrich experiences by reviewing them, much as a chess master goes over a game record. Reviews generally occur after mistakes and not as a routine, and when they do occur, they seem to be directed at what happened, whereas the cognitive critiques are aimed at the thought processes of the key decision makers. Moreover, reviews are conducted in a forum that is usually not conducive to reflection. Also, I need light. Here we go. In most settings, there are not always enough real incidents to build expertise quickly enough. That is why it is important to make effective use the incidents that do occur. The squad leaders were initially skeptical about the decision skills training program, but soon became enthusiastic. They believed that the training helped to boost expertise in decision-making and judgment, so that they felt more prepared to make difficult decisions under uncertainty and time pressure. A sixth application is to use decision requirements for designing software systems. For a given task, the decision requirements are the key decisions and how they are made. This includes the decisions that are required by the task, as well as the cues, information, and strategies required to make the decisions. When design engineers are given a new project, they are usually told what the system is supposed to accomplish, that is, what it will do if it works the way it is supposed to. Yet they are rarely told what the key decisions are that the system must help the operator make, or the types of strategies or rules of thumb that the operator is likely to use. Left without any way to visualize the operator, designers do the best job they can to pack information onto screens so that it will be all there, so that it will all be there when needed. All the relevant information was available to the crew during the Vincennes shootdown, but the format of the information was difficult to interpret. The crucial altitude information was presented as a static 4-digit number on a separate monitor. In several projects, we have been using decision requirements to design knowledge-based systems and human interfaces. In one project, we identified the decision requirements of U.S. Air Force weapons directors who fly in the AWACS, AWACS, that's the acronym, Airborne Warning and Command System, airplane. The weapons directors monitor the radar picture of the air for hundreds of miles, vectoring planes to different destinations. AWACS is a large airplane with a radar dish on its back. It is a flying command post, and the weapons directors are air traffic controllers working in the middle of a battle. By identifying their decision requirements in defensive operations, we could make some simple modifications of their interface with their workstations. Okay, here's example 7.2. And let me see here. Okay, I got it back on my Kindle. Let's go. Dude, I was about to freaking smash this thing to pieces. All right. Trying to multitask. I was trying to read that book there and also flip back through my Kindle and fix the font size. That was frustrating, but we did it. Okay, we're back. Example 7.2, the AWACS weapons directors. And I think after this example, it's pretty much done. In 1991, we started a demonstration project to find out how useful it is to apply a cognitive approach to design. The charge of the project, funded by the Armstrong Laboratory of the Air Force's Human Systems Division, was to design a computer interface from the vantage point of the user, not the equipment. On our team was Steve Andriol of Drexel University to recommend technological solutions, and Len Edelman of George Mason University, who had written the book on evaluating decision support systems. That was written by Edelman in 1992. The project leader was David Klinger, Klinger, who was supported by Laura Militello and Marvin Thordson. The reason for using AWACS to demonstrate the cognitive design approach was that there was a good AWACS simulator, a computer-driven mock-up of the AWACS workstations at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio. It would be easy to modify the simulator and then to run several weapons directors through it to test how much the new system helped them. A meeting with the AWACS specialist in San Antonio helped us solidify the plans to conduct interviews, redesign the interface, and conduct the tests. After the testing, we conducted the interviews, codified the interview data, and then worked to figure out what should go into the interface. We shipped these requirements to the systems research laboratory programmers in San Antonio, who reprogrammed the AWACS simulator for testing of the new system. There's a lot of jargon here that's just like, I just feel like it's a lot of fluff. I just want to get to the point, man. When we began, most of the people on our team had no experience with AWACS at all. We had no idea about what we were going to improve or even if any improvements were needed. The challenge was to find out if identifying decision requirements made a difference. One of the key decision requirements was situation awareness. We learned that the weapons directors had to be especially vigilant for the high, fast flyers, the enemy aircraft that were the greatest threats. The decision requirements also indicated a few key factors that could be used to identify these high threats. That let us develop a simple algorithm to let the system outline each high-threat aircraft in a red circle. We were not trying to use very sophisticated methods, but rather were searching for the simple fixes that could have an impact. We had selected only a few changes for the interface. We highlighted critical tracks to make them more salient, used color to distinguish land and water, and moved a control panel onto the screen where it could be more easily be used than in previous position below, more easily be used than in its previous position below the screen. By May 1992, we were ready to test the interface to see if the new interface features made any difference at all. The evaluation tested the two interfaces, the current one, which had been used for many years, and our new one. The result was an improvement in performance of about 15 to 20%. In a simulated test, the weapons directors using our interface allowed 20% fewer hostile strikes to be completed, a 15% reduction in the number of friendly aircraft shot down. That's pretty good. A 36% decrease in the number of missiles fired that missed their target. A 9% increase in the overall kill ratio, hostile aircraft shot down versus friendly aircraft lost. A 76% increase in successful air refuelings. An 18% decrease in the number of aircraft having to return to base for refueling. We got these effects using highly experienced weapons directors. Each director in the study used the standard interface for half of the simulated missions, and our new interface for the other half. The directors had approximately 1,500 hours of practice with the standard interface. We could only give them 4.5 hours to practice with the new interface, and still they did better. The redesigned interface satisfied their decision requirements. In a relatively short amount of time, 10 months, decision researchers with no domain experience were able to elicit information and redesign an interface to produce a large improvement in performance. It would have been very costly to achieve a 15 to 20% improvement in performance by developing a faster and more powerful computers or providing more weapons director training. Okay, that's the end of the chapter. That was just chapter 7. That was just chapter 7. I think it was like 30 pages, but I did yap a little in the middle. So if you guys have any thoughts, if you guys have any feedback or criticism, or you want to talk about the book, or you want to talk about what you think is going to happen next, or you want to talk about the examples, feel free to request and call in. Otherwise, I'm going to end the space and we'll get out of here. I know it's been a long chapter, but I'll give you guys a second, but I'll close it out. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks for paying attention, being active listeners. Thanks for dealing with the technical difficulties, but hopefully it'll be better next time. This is the first time I'm using my Kindle on these spaces, but yeah, have a good rest of your night, and I guess I'll see you guys next time for chapter 8. So have a good rest of your night, guys, and thanks for tuning in.